15 years ago, the earth shifted under my feet. The earth shifted in the way that sometimes happens in life when we move from one moment of awareness to another, when like a paradigm shifts, when there's a new level of consciousness that gets achieved. It's like a state of grace. And the earth shifted because my youngest son, at the time, he wasn't quite 2 years old, and he's the youngest of 5 kids. He'd fallen off of our bed and hit his head on the floor. And since he was so young and really couldn't express himself enough to answer, the questions that we were asking him, we decided that the best course of action was to take him to the ER. I stayed behind with the rest of the kids, and my wife began that journey, which we'd done times in the past, that journey to the hospital, and so many other parents have done the same, that you undertake with all of this worry and trepidation. That visit to the ER would change my life. It would change my wife's life. It would change my kids' life. And now, nearly 2 decades later, I can tell you that it's changed the lives of countless other people that we've come in contact with. You see something really interesting happen in that ER visit. Hours into being at the emergency room, when my wife and my son were in the examination room, that little room that they put you in, after they've been seen by the doctor and they're waiting really to be discharged, they overheard an argument. It was hard to distinguish at first. It was a bit faint down the hall and, behind the heavy doors. But as the argument grew in volume, the voices became more clear. And there was the voice of a man arguing with the voice of a woman. And the voice of the man was, you could hear saying things, in a very angry tone of voice. Things like, "You're wasting my time. You could have gone to CVS for this. Learn to take better care of your kids." Now, none of this made any sense to my wife. Why were people arguing this way inside of the ER? Why weren't the doctors intervening? Why hadn't security shown up at this point? Eventually, the voices grew so loud, and frankly, her curiosity and her concern got so great that she left the room, got my son in her arms, and she walks down the hall towards all of this noise and commotion. Just at that very moment, the door of another one of the examination rooms swings open, and this man wearing a white lab coat bursts out into the hallway, and he's flustered and annoyed, and he storms off. And behind him, in the room he had just left, my wife now hears multiple voices, multiple female voices. And one of them is crying. And she walks up and she looks into the room, and there in the wake of this doctor's outburst is a young Latina mom with a small child in her arms, no older than my own son. And there's this other Black woman who was consoling her. My wife is, wide-eyed, and she introduces herself awkwardly, and she says to them, are you okay? What is this about? What happened? This young Latina mom is grabbing onto her kid so tight she doesn't even look up at my wife. Does not meet her eye line. She's just clutching her kid, and she's pretending my wife doesn't exist. It's like she was not even there, like she's invisible. The older Black woman then proceeds to explain to my wife that she's there to advocate for this young mom. This young Latina mom had been sleeping with her son in an alley behind a motel. And the motel manager had taken pity on her and allowed her to sleep in the lobby of the motel overnight while he called around and looked for different types of resources and for help. The older Black woman's church, which is adjacent to this motel, had been one of those people that the hotel manager had called. And she, this older Black woman, had been dispatched from the church to meet this young mom, meet her where she was, and to offer her some help. Now, why were they in the hospital ER? Well, this little boy, who was scarcely 2 years old, had not gone to the bathroom in weeks. And the mom, understandably, was very worried. Now, my wife and I wouldn't find out until much later the reasons why this young Latina mom was sleeping in the alley, or why her son wasn't going to the bathroom. We wouldn't find out the fact that the mom was homeless because she'd fled an abusive relationship in the Bay Area up in San Francisco. And she'd actually driven down to Los Angeles to try to reconnect with family and friends, but she'd met resistance and basically had nowhere else to go. We wouldn't find out the fact that the son, this little 2-year-old boy, had tragically witnessed his mother being assaulted, and that it had been from that traumatic experience that he had stopped going to the bathroom. We wouldn't find those things out for many, many days, but it was at that exact moment in the hallway of that ER across from a crying mom and her kid and her advocate that my wife made a decision that's made all the difference. She invited these two women to our house to pick up baby items, diapers, medicine, and just to have a cup of coffee. And thank God she did. We've served homeless families ever since. This young Latina mom, her name is Myra, and her son, his name is Daniel. And they're still part of our lives 15 years later. They're doing good. They're not perfect, but that's not the point. You know, there's a movie that I think about a lot when I think about the life of working with the poor, especially working with homeless families and kids. It's called The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. Maybe you've seen it. It's actually kind of a forgettable movie in some respects, but this movie always comes to mind when I think about this. And the story revolves basically around some British retirees that they essentially decide to outsource their retirement to what they think is this super exotic and obviously a lot less expensive India. And they're lured by ads for this incredible hotel, and they can imagine a life of leisure and lush surroundings. And so they pack up and they go to India. But when they get there, they find that in addition to all the exotic sights and sounds, which are there as advertised, there's also the reality of great poverty and great need. And as a result, they're all too scared to go outside. And then here's the irony. They're retired, they're living abroad, and they won't leave their rooms. But one brave soul ventures out, and she eventually persuades the others to do the same. And she says, this is the quote that always comes to mind. She says, India is an assault on the senses. It's like a wave. If you resist it, you go under. But if you ride it out, you arrive at the other side. And serving the homeless is exactly the same thing. It's an assault on the senses. People who look different, live different, have different stories and backgrounds and perspectives, all in a way that's vulnerable and exposed for the entire world to see. And it's real. It can be very scary at first, but only to realize that once you dive in, it's a wave too. And that can take you to the other side. I've learned so many things in those 15 years, so many incredible lessons. But when you sum them all up, they're fundamentally three things. Number one is humans are sacred. The fact that we have intellect and will and reason, we're just different from the entire physical order. We have a dignity that's not the sum of our accomplishments, our position, our education, or our prosperity. It's just inherent because we're human. Second, I've learned that relationships are vital. You know, as counterintuitive as it sounds, houses actually don't solve homelessness. Communities do. Relationships do. Knowing the first name of a person does. Looking after another does. There's no amount of innovative shelter design, solar power resources, tools, or process, or money that matters without it. The last thing I've learned is that the solution to homelessness is everyone's job. You know, at one point I actually thought that I wanted to be part of the solution, but I realized in time that that was actually, you know, even though maybe noble, it was the wrong way to think about it. Because that suggests that the solution is one big thing, and we each carry a little bit of this big thing. But the truth is that the solution is actually many little things. It's like life itself. It's a bunch of little things, of individual moments, like my wife in that hospital room. And each one of us has a role in it. Each one of us is the solution. When the ground shifted for me 15 years ago, I didn't realize that great lesson. I didn't realize that the solution to this incredible problem that gets more visible every day, that has spilled out from Skid Row to everyday neighborhoods, this problem that impacts all people, but has an outsized impact in Black and Latino communities. That problem that feels unfixable, that feels insurmountable, the solution to that problem was me. Thank you.
Charlie, thank you so much for that story. And, I just want to thank you for the way you and your wife kind of modeled empathy for your own family, which gives us, as the audience, a model for how to practice empathy in our own lives. So the next time when we're encountered a similar situation where we don't just kind of dismiss it and make assumptions and run away. And I love the way you talked about I just had to write it down. The solutions are many, many little things. And if everybody does just their little part, what tremendous changes that we can all make. So thank you so much, Charlie, for that really beautiful and powerful story.
Thank you.